JavaScript is not really JavaScript. And the reason why I say this is because some of the things that we think JavaScript is or JavaScript can do, or let me say some of the things I used to think JavaScript can do, is actually not true. JavaScript by itself cannot do these things. The reason why it's able to do these things is because of the environment it is being executed in. Now let me show you a quick example. Here I am in my browser console, and in the console I can type any valid JavaScript, 1 + 1, 2. And let's say I do console.log and then I pass the document object. You see here, this logs the document element object, and this whole document has the head, the body, and everything on the current page that I am on. But now let's go to a node environment. This is a node environment. You see I'm in the node REPL. Then if I say 1 + 1, see that works. If I do console log and then I pass the document object, we have an error. Document is not defined. So why is this the case? Why do we have a document object in the browser environment, but we do not have a document object in the Node.js environment? Well, first, let's understand what JavaScript is. JavaScript is a dynamic programming language where you can do a lot of stuff. You can create your loops, you can create functions, you can perform mathematical operations, you can do a lot of stuff with strings, with objects, with arrays, you can generate random numbers, you can do a lot of all these things because they are within the capabilities of JavaScript. JavaScript doesn't need to rely on an environment to perform mathematical operation. But when you need to do something beyond JavaScript capabilities or beyond JavaScript scope, then JavaScript needs to rely on the environment it is being executed in. And what do I mean by beyond its scope? For example, mathematical operations, that's within the scope of JavaScript as a programming language. But for example, let's say you want to do something with timers, your set timeout and your set interval. That is not within the capabilities of JavaScript as a programming language. Or let's say you want to perform network requests, you want to make a get or post request to one server somewhere. That is beyond the scope of JavaScript as a programming language. And in such cases, JavaScript has to rely on the environment it is being executed in. So if the environment allows it or gives it access to performing network requests using the environment resources, then in that way, JavaScript will be able to make a network request. So coming back to the document object being available on the browser environment, the reason for that is because the browser environment exposes the DOM API. By exposing this API, JavaScript has access to the document object, and from that object, JavaScript can do things like get elements by ID, query selector, create elements, all these things that can modify the document on that browser. The browser doesn't only expose the DOM API, there are a lot more APIs as you can see on this page. We have the background fetch API, battery API, Bluetooth API. You scroll down, there is the DOM API, the fetch API, there is the history API. There are a bunch of APIs here. If you scroll to the end, you can even see things like vibration API, a couple of them. So these are the things that the browser exposes to JavaScript, and then JavaScript is able to use the resources of the browser to perform different functions. But the DOM API is not exposed in a Node.js environment. So when you try to do console log document, JavaScript has no idea what document is because it doesn't know what document is internally, and the environment did not expose anything like document to it. That is why you get an error. On this page, we can also find the APIs available in the Node.js environment. From the beginning here, you can see assertion testing, C++ add-ons, cluster, command line options, even the console API. You see, even the console is an API. And if we go back to the list of web APIs, you can also see the console API. So even console is something that JavaScript does not know by itself. But the reason why you can do your console.log, console.error, console.blah blah blah without getting errors is because the browser environment exposes the console API, and the Node.js environment also exposes the console API. Going down, there's HTTP internationalization. You can come to this page and see a list of these APIs that the Node.js environment exposes to JavaScript. By looking at this list of APIs in Node.js, you can see that it's even possible for you to be able to do certain things in a Node.js environment, but if you try to repeat that same code or functionality in a browser environment, you will get an error. Now, just to clarify, when I say APIs like browser APIs or Node.js APIs, I'm not referring to like GET request or POST request URL APIs. What I mean by APIs is as simple as, let's say I'm standing outside a house and I want to use the house kitchen, I want to use the house bathroom. The house has these resources, but for me to be able to use this house's TV or kitchen, then I need an interface, which in the case can be a door. So using that door, I can be able to go into the house and then I can use these things. So when I say API, I'm referring to interfaces that gives JavaScript access to certain resources. Now, one question you might have is if JavaScript has to depend on, for example, a Chrome browser before it can do things like network requests or timers or DOM manipulations and all these things, then how are you able to have a consistent experience with other browsers like Safari, Edge, a bunch of them? I don't know a list of all the browsers. Well, the reason why you have this consistent experience is because there is some sort of agreement or standards that these browsers follow. So by following these standards, they're able to create a consistent experience where you do something on this browser and when you take your code and run it on another browser, you get the same functionality. Now, for these standards, we have the W3C, which stands for World Wide Web, that is the W3, and the C stands for consortium. And this is an organization, or you can say a group of people who come together to define standards for the web. So here they're able to define things like accessibility, web or browser features, and all those things. So if, for example, I want to create a browser and I want to call the browser D browser, or one fancy name, if I want my browser to be a standard that people would like to use, then I have to follow these standards. If I want to, for example, implement accessibility, I cannot just do things my own way. I have to go through these standards and see what an ideal accessible browser should look like, or the features that it should include, or the controls that it should include. And there are also some cases where, for example, let's say on Chrome, you have a screenshot API that allows you to create screenshots, and maybe the Safari browser doesn't have that screenshot API. Now, one reason why you might have an inconsistent experience like this is because maybe a screenshot feature is not addressed in the W3 standards. After Chrome may have already implemented all the W3 standards, Chrome can choose to add extra things, extra APIs, like, okay, let's expose a screenshot API so that JavaScript can use the browser's resources to capture the screen. But Safari may say, we don't see any need for that. We don't see any reason why JavaScript should do that. And maybe they don't expose such API. So if you take your code that generates screenshots from Chrome and you run it on Safari, that might throw errors. So you might actually have some cases of inconsistent experience where it feels like a code that works on this browser doesn't work on that browser. It's not because the JavaScript is different. They may be the same JavaScript versions, but again, it relies on the environment. Chrome's environment allows you to do that. Safari's environment does not allow you to do that. Now, that is just an example. I'm not saying this is actually the case, but you get the point. So, coming back to JavaScript, it's a programming language where it can do a couple of things, but if you need to do things beyond its scope, then you need to understand where the place of APIs comes in. These are APIs that comes from the environment that JavaScript is being executed in. So let's say I want JavaScript to run in another environment. Maybe, for example, I want JavaScript to run in this fancy cup that my sister gifted me. If I want this cup, or if I want JavaScript in this cup to be able to make a network request to a server, then I have to make sure that this environment actually has the resources for that, and then I expose those resources to JavaScript, which is an API. So even if I run JavaScript here, JavaScript will be able to do mathematical operations and all this stuff that it is capable of, but to do things outside its scope, then it has to rely on the cup, which is the environment it is being run in. Understanding something like this gives you a better idea or a better knowledge of JavaScript. And when you begin to notice inconsistent experience where something works on Chrome, but it doesn't work on this other browser, then maybe it has something to do with the API. Did this other browser expose that API for JavaScript? I hope you have learned something from this video. Maybe as somebody who used to think, oh, JavaScript could do this and that. I hope this video kind of enlightens you and shows you that for some features, JavaScript has to rely on the environment. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Also, please share with others who may find it helpful, and subscribe if you'd love to see more videos like this.